Right now, across the UK, commercial property rents are rising, but commercial property values are reported to be falling. On the face of it, that makes absolutely no sense at all. So keep watching, I'm going to explain how that can happen, but more importantly, the impact it can have on you as a commercial property investor. Hi, my name's Edward, I'm a chartered surveyor. I work full-time for a FTSE 100 listed company, and until very recently I was a university lecturer teaching real estate investment finance and real estate valuation. Hopefully then I have a good combination of practical and theoretical experience that I can share with you and help you make more confident and profitable decisions about commercial property investment. Right, so first of all, let's take a look at where this information is coming from. So in this particular case, I'm looking at a survey that is produced by a firm called CBRE, and I know that the sample size is 1,000 commercial properties across the UK. Both those factors are really important. CBRE is regarded as one of the top 5 real estate consultancies in the UK, so that's a pretty good start. And I would argue that 1,000 commercial properties as a sample size is more than adequate to give a very good indication of what's going on. Let's take a look at the details. I'm only concerning myself with these two left-hand columns on this page, the 1-month data and the 3-month data. For the 1-month data, we can see that rental growth was at 0.3%. And we can see for the 3-month data, rental growth was 0.7%. In both cases, we're not looking at massive gains, but they are positive gains nonetheless. If we go up a row, we can look at capital growth, and we can see that over a 1-month period, we've got 0.2% drops in capital values. And over a 3-month period, we have a full 1% drop in capital values of commercial property across the UK. So to summarise then, over both the 1-month period and the last 3 months from now, we've had rental increases and we've got capital value decreases across the UK. There are a number of reasons why this can happen, but I suspect the main reason is that rental growth was not at the rate expected by the investment market, and so this naturally causes a bit of a dampening of spirits and less enthusiasm for investment. So what's the quantitative impact of this? Well, it basically means that because there is a lower expectation of rental growth, our yield, our initial yield, instead of getting smaller and giving us a bigger year's purchase figure, our initial yield actually gets bigger. It increases, the number rises, and that means that our year's purchase figure shrinks. So the value of our property gets less. A little bit complicated when it's said in words. So let's look at this as an example, and we're just going to use some high level numbers. So let's assume then that we buy a property for £1 million. And that property is giving us a rent of £60,000 per annum. If we divide our rent by the price we paid for the property and then multiply that answer by 100, we get what's called the initial yield. And in this case, 60,000 divided by 1 million multiplied by 100 equals 6%. So our initial yield for this property is 6%. I'm actually going to produce a couple of videos covering the topic of yield and the different types of yield in the very near future. But for now, just regard yield as a reference to the return on investment that we get from the income element only. We're not talking about the rise or fall in the value of our building. For most commercial property, there is a lease in place. And for most commercial property, that lease will dictate that rent reviews may take place once every 5 years. So whilst rents rise over a period of years, a landlord with a 5-yearly rent review cycle has to wait until the rent review before that increase in rent transfers from being a notional increase to an actual increase, i.e. money received. That doesn't mean, though, that the value of the property remains static for that period of time. The value of the building will rise in the expectation of receiving an increased rent at some point in the future. So we can now use that figure, 6%, and we can convert that into a really useful little tool, and that tool is called years purchase. I'm going to show you now how that works. So let's take 100, divide it by our yield, which is 6. 100 divided by 6 is 16.67, and that is our year's purchase figure. In other words, what you're actually doing is buying a property that is 16.67 times the rent income for that property. So let's just prove that. We know that our rental income is £60,000. If we multiply that by 16.67, the answer is rounded to 1 million. So our rent, £60,000, times the year's purchase of 16.67 gives us the price we pay for the property, £1 million. Now, I'm deliberately using high-level figures here. It's just a numbers exercise that we're going through in order to give you a tool that is really helpful as a basis of understanding for effective commercial and residential real estate investment. Okay, so let's go back to the original premise of this video, and that was that we saw across a sample of 1,000 properties rents increasing across the UK, but at the same time across that same sample the value of those properties was decreasing. All of a sudden, investors see limited growth potential in the commercial property market, and this of course impacts yields, because if yields widen or the yield number increases to a higher number, it actually reflects the limited growth potential of that investment. Let me explain. We started this by dividing 100 by our yield, which was 6, and that gave us a year's purchase figure of 16.67. We multiplied 16.67 by our rent, which is £60,000, and that gave us, in round figures, a capital value of £1 million. Okay, so far so good. But what's happened is the level of expected rental growth has not been as anticipated. So to reflect that, the yields actually widened, so 7%. So if we look at the impact of that on our property, we can see actually it's pretty disastrous. So we know through that simple calculation to establish year's purchase, we do 100 divided by 7, and that equals 14.29, and that's our year's purchase. Our rent, remember, we haven't had a rent review, so we're still only receiving £60,000. So our rent is £60,000, and we multiply that by the year's purchase figure, which is 14.29, and look at the impact that has on value. Our value goes to £857,143. We bought the building for £1 million. Oh dear. So there we go. We've used some fairly straightforward mathematics to expose the dangers of a reduced level of rental increase on your property. I hope that's been helpful, and hopefully that will now allow you to go and model some sensitivity around a potential investment that you might be thinking of making, and also take a much wider view of the market and where we are right now, and whether you think that property that you're thinking about investing in could be impacted by any particular decrease or reduction in anticipated rental growth. You know exactly what's going to happen. You can model it now yourself.